Hello, everyone. This is Mark Roberts. I'm part of the Pree Center for Leadership at Fuller Seminary, and I am very pleased to be welcoming you folks to this webinar. The webinar is called Intergenerational Collaboration, a Key to Third Flourishing and Transformed Communities. And I know that's a lot of words, but it really does get at what we're excited to talk with you about today. This webinar is being sponsored by the Pree Center for Leadership at Fuller Seminary, and we're committed to helping leaders thrive as they make a difference that matters in the world. The Pree Center has been focused for years on serving leaders in the marketplace and in the church. Recently, though, we've realized that millions of leaders are entering a new season of life, sometimes called retirement, though we prefer to speak of it as the third of life. And many in this time of life aren't just sitting back and watching others make the world a better place. They are investing their lives in ways that serve others and that help to transform our society. Everyone in the third needs to be encouraged by a new vision for what their life could be all about. And that's what we're doing in the Pree Center through our resources and experiences in partnership with folks like the ones you'll be hearing from today. If you're interested, you can learn more from our website. So about a year ago, when we were getting ready to launch our third initiative, I met with a woman in the Bay Area of California who had already invested many years of her life in this kind of work as part of encore.org. As we talked, I felt kind of like Luke Skywalker with Obi-Wan Kenobi. And Eunice Lin Nichols had so much wisdom and insight and passion for the work that we were just beginning. And she graciously offered to help us. And that's why we're here today with Eunice and two of her amazing colleagues in Encore and Intergenerational work. By the way, I think I said her name in the Greek New Testament, Eunice. It's actually Eunice. Let me introduce our panelists and then we'll get into our conversation. And I should note that we'll have some time near the end of this webinar for questions and answers. And if you have a question for our panelists, please put them in the Zoom Q&A. There's a Q&A at the bottom. And so any questions you have, put it in there. And then for the end of our time, I'll go in there and we'll ask any questions. If you got any helpful links or comments or whatever, those go into the chat. And we're putting other links up there. So according to the Encore website, Eunice Lin Nichols is obsessed with bringing older and younger generations together to solve society's greatest challenges, creating a better future for all. She is Vice President of Innovation at encore.org, where she leads the Gen to Gen Innovation Fellowship. And Eunice has been doing this kind of work for over 2 decades, having begun when she was in her 20s. She's been recognized by many influential organizations for her groundbreaking leadership in fostering collaboration between older and younger people for the good of all. Now, Eunice introduced me to our 2 other panelists, whom I'm really thrilled to welcome to this webinar today. Raymond Jetson's resume is one of the most diverse I've ever seen. With a long history of public service and church leadership, he has served in several positions of state government in Louisiana, as well as pastor of the Star Hill Church. And inspired by his experience as a fellow in Harvard's Advanced Leadership Initiative, when some folks might have stepped back into retirement, Ray stepped forward to found Metromorphosis. That's right, Metromorphosis. And this work creates movements that matter enough to people that they become engaged in bringing change to their own communities. Metromorphosis is profoundly intergenerational, as you'll hear in just a moment. Now, Ray is doing this work intergenerationally, significantly through his partnership with Sherreta Harrison, who works with Ray at Metromorphosis and is a self-described nonprofit warrior, which I love that. With years of experience in training and teaching and personal development, Sherreta serves as the sustainability catalyst for Metromorphosis. She's especially committed to create access for those who have been historically denied it. And both Sherreta and Ray live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where they're working to foster transformed communities. Sherreta has said, by developing intergenerational co-leadership models for community change, We support our aging leaders, encourage innovation, and create sustainable vehicles for change. So Eunice, Ray, and Sherreta, welcome to this webinar, and thank you for being here. I have so many questions, but I'd like to begin with Eunice, if I may. Eunice, I've just introduced you, and I finally got your name right. Our guests have some idea, barely, of who you are and what you do, but would you be willing to say a little more, maybe just a 60-second overview of the work you're doing?
Absolutely. And Mark, I would be so honored for you to continue to call me in the original Greek pronunciation of my name. I was named in honor of Eunice, mother of Timothy, known for her faith, but I had no idea that I have been mispronouncing it my whole life. So thanks for that. So as Mark mentioned, I work for a nonprofit called encore.org, and we bring older and younger changemakers together to solve problems, bridge divides, and co-generate a better future together. I like to think of our work as deeply rooted in the belief that intergenerational solutions are uniquely suited to help us meet the challenges of this moment, and never more so than right now in the midst of really deep-seated national divisions, let alone a global pandemic that has isolated the generations from one another more than ever before. So that ethos is really infused in everything we do. Two brief things that I'm excited about that we're working on right now is this fall, I launched the Gen to Gen Innovation Fellowship for innovators who are creating and scaling intergenerational solutions to some of our biggest problems. And our first 15 fellows range in age from 19 to 75. And Sherreta is one of our fellows, and you'll get to hear more about her work. And we also have an ambitious narrative change agenda that includes the Encore Public Voices Fellowship, which is a cohort of fellows, once again, of all ages, who bring new and necessary perspectives at the intersection of aging, longevity, intergenerational connection, and social justice. And Ray was in our first cohort of Public Voices Fellows. So it's a real privilege for me to be here with all of you today.
Thank you. That's so great. See, now people understand my Obi-Wan Kenobi comment earlier. You know, you've been working with older adults. We talk about third folk for years. Now, you started this when you were decades away from being in the third yourself. So, I mean, how did you get into this work and why?
So in some ways, I think of myself as being born into this work. I'm the daughter of Chinese immigrants from Taiwan. And even before I was born, my grandmother on my dad's side actually was one of 12 children. And half of those children were dedicated to saving lives. And so they became part of the medical profession, and half were dedicated to saving souls and went into ministry. So when my parents immigrated to the United States, St. Louis, Missouri, where I was born, they launched a Chinese heritage church, just like a Bible study that started in our living room with other graduate students like them, and it grew into the church that I grew up in. And like many cultures in the Asian world, it's very intergenerational by nature. So I feel like I grew up already with a deep appreciation for elders, and my grandparents came to live with us when I was young, and were very much embedded in my life. I had lots of aunties, uncles, grandmas, and grandpas. They were sometimes related to me, most often not, and they all felt like extended family. So I'd say part of a pivotal moment in my story is when I was a young adult. And like many young adults, for the first time, I was kind of put out in the world, and I fell into, for the first time, a very age segregated world, college, and then my first career, where I was with a bunch of young people. And it was a lot of fun, but I think I started to feel a bit of the loss of connection to a generational way of living. And it was at that time that I ended up seeing a job opening to run a program called Experience Corps, which is a program of encore.org. So I was in my early 20s, and I was in the Bay Area, and I started running a program that brought older adults, people 50 and older, into public schools to help kids read by third grade. And I showed up and I just felt like I had come home. And so that crew of volunteers, while they helped kids read by third grade, boy, did they pour into me and my young staff and just change the trajectory of my life in terms of what I felt was possible for communities to look like.
Well, that's so interesting. I just wondered how it happened. So now, you know, a couple decades later, why are you still so passionate about this work?
Um, well, I feel like that early experience in my career helped me to make a couple of important intentional decisions in my life. And one was that I never wanted to work again in a place that wasn't intentionally intergenerational. It's sort of like once you've gone and lived one way, you just can't go back. That was my experience. And luckily, because Encore was at that time still a pretty young organization, was just at the beginning of its trajectory in and what it wanted to do as an organization. And I've kind of drafted off of Encore my whole career. At every stage, they've done something that has just been exactly what I wanted to do. And so a little bit later, I ended up running a program of ours called the Purpose Prize, which was an award program for people who were doing the best work of their life in their 50s or 60s and beyond. It wasn't a lifetime achievement award. It was $100,000 for the next 10 to 20 years of your life. And I think during that stage, I got a little glimpse of how one takes all the life experience, all the talent and career experience, and how one could funnel that into something incredible, a kind of a gift to the world for another decade or two or three. So that was another shift. And then I think right now, as I mentioned before, just seeing the level of division in our country and how much of that is built into the structures of how we live and work. I'm a mom of children who are 12 and 14, and I'm just like shuttled into an age segregated world of school. Even in the church I attend, we have older adult programs and programs for young children, but they don't often meet. And so I think that passion of mine to now start to look at the structural ways in which we might be able to shift that, that's something that feels like a lifetime's worth of work.
Man, that's so great. Well, thank you for your work and your leadership, and for sharing that, and for introducing us to Ray and Sherreta. Ray, when I read your resume, it seems to me like you've had more careers than most people have had jobs. Just amazing in political leadership, nonprofit leadership, pastoral leadership. And just about the time when you could have said, well, I've run the good race, I think I'm going to sit back and retire, you started Metamorphosis, which is this amazing new work. And so you've sort of had your own kind of encore transition. Can you tell us a little bit about how and why you started Metamorphosis? What was going on with you, and why you're doing this work right now?
Oh, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to share with my partner in change, Sherreta Harrison. And it was just really great to hear Eunice's story. I've admired Eunice and her work, but to understand the underpinnings of it is just, this has been a valuable use of time just to hear your story. And so thank you for that, Eunice. And so, Mark, one of the things that I have attempted to practice, interestingly enough, when I prepared to leave my time at Star Hill Church, I asked folks, what did you hear from me most over these 23 years? And the message that resonated with folks most was time and seasons, that there is a time to everything, and it has a season. And as you well know, that word time points to a specific moment at which things are to start, and the word season talks of a duration of time for which that thing is supposed to happen. And so I've tried to live my life being sensitive to time and seasons. And as I sense myself being drawn in to a new time and a new season, I move. It's not always an easy thing to do. I left the legislature with at least a couple of more terms. I could have run and not been impacted by term limits. I left the chief operating officer with our largest state agency to run a startup nonprofit in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, because I sensed that that's what I was supposed to do. I shared with a congregation the hardest message in 23 years, that the next year would be my last as their pastor, and walked into Metamorphosis full time, because I sincerely believe that that was the work that I was supposed to do at that time and for that season. And so I've tried to live out what I believe to be one of the most powerful truths contained in the Word of God.
Wow, I love that wisdom about time and season. In fact, I'm flagging that for some just my own reflection later on, because that's not the way we're often enculturated to think, you know, and even in the church. But man, you are living it. So what you're doing today just looks so exciting. And, you know, I mostly know it from stuff I've read about you, and then of course went all over your website, and I'm thinking, man, this is really something. I mean, why are you so passionate about this work, the metamorphosis work you're doing today, Ray?
A couple of reasons. First, it's something different, that there isn't anything anywhere else that's exactly like metamorphosis, and sometimes that is a reason for rejoicing, and other times it's a reason for weeping. But there's nothing like it. It has that certainly was a vision to truly transform inner city neighborhoods, but built upon this principle that you start from within, that you focus on the assets and the resources that are there. One of the statements that I use often is that the resources that are necessary to bring sustainable change to inner city neighborhoods cannot be imported exclusively. That you have to recognize that there are assets and that there are institutions, that there are brilliant people. And the challenge is, how do you engage in a respectful way and mobilize them to create the communities that they want to live in, rather than the one that we prescribed in advance for them. And so beginning to understand what are the critical elements of doing that, and seeing it be successful, and unfortunately in some instances not be successful, it just brings an excitement and an energy to life. I've worked with some absolutely amazing people, from startup to the last few years with my partner, Sherreta. And so there's just an excitement that's there to do something different, and to fundamentally and deeply believe that it has the potential to make a difference in communities like the one I grew up in.
Man, that is such an inspiring vision. And Ray, I can see why folk like to get with you and share in it, like folk like Sherreta. So Sherreta, you know, as I was also reading your resume, I thought, man, you're nowhere near the third, and you already have a lot going on in your life and have done a lot. And now you're working with Ray. Can you give us just maybe a 60-second overview of the work you're doing now at Metamorphosis?
Sure, and thank you. Just like both Eunice and Raymond, it is such a privilege to be in this space with my partner and with Eunice, who I am. My fandom is growing with every encounter, and also the work that you're doing at the center. I just think it's so important. So as you mentioned, I am the sustainability catalyst at Metamorphosis, and so what that means is that my work is focused on the longevity of Metamorphosis, the work that we're doing, and the impact that it'll have in the communities. And most recently, Raymond and I have begun to focus my work on the longevity and the legacy of the people that are working, not just in Metamorphosis, but are working in the communities. And so one of the things that I am just really excited to be working on through Metamorphosis, and also as Eunice mentioned with the Gen to Gen Innovation Fellowship, is this idea of intergenerational co-leadership models, how we leverage both experienced and emerging leadership in ways that that create solutions that are sustained throughout the community. A lot of the things that we're facing in community change and community work are intergenerational by nature, right? They outlive a lot of times the people who are working on them. And so when we are intentional about connecting those generations, I think we can see greater continuity and greater progress toward solutions. And so that's what I'm focused on at Metamorphosis.
Man, I can see why you're pretty passionate about that, and why that's so important. Now, Sherreta, I'm guessing that you're not a third person. In fact, you and Ray are probably a good intergenerational example in your own work life. And I'd love to hear a little more about that, because you folks are working out the thing you're talking about. So, as you know, it's one thing to sort of talk about something as an idea, and it's another thing to live it and embody it and model it. So tell me a little bit, and then Ray, you might want to weigh in too. Tell me a little bit about your working relationship.
So, I mean, I think probably the most honest thing that I can say about my relationship with Raymond is that it has been a journey, right? And I don't know if you all know this, and Raymond is probably gonna shy away from this, but he's a bit of a legend in Baton Rouge. I'll let him tell you the stories about his family and his work and the significance that it's had in our community. But because of that, I knew of Raymond before I actually met him in the flesh. And when I did meet him through our Urban Leadership Development Initiative, one of the strategies of Metromorphosis, when I did meet him, I had this kind of strange mix of awe and intimidation, right? In awe of this person who had accomplished and achieved and contributed so much, but was also willing to pour that back into this group of emerging leaders. But then there was this intimidation of, am I going to live up to that, and honestly wanting to impress him. And even when a few years later, when I came to Metromorphosis full time, I still existed in kind of that dual state of awe and intimidation. But Raymond said two things to me that I hold dear today, and I share with other people when they came on. He said, the first thing that he said to me was that it was important that we do life together. And what he meant by that was that if any of the work that we were going to do was going to be meaningful in the lives of people, it was going to be important that we didn't just talk about work, that we didn't just work together, that we come to know one another on a deeper level, have a deeper understanding of what motivates us as people, what drives us. And then the second thing that he said to me was that he would rather I make the wrong decision than no decision at all. And those two statements did two things for me. Number one, they taught me that, or they showed me that this was just not going to be a relationship where he was interested in creating a mini me. He wasn't interested in me doing things his way. He was interested in understanding my experience and my wisdom and how we can build something together. And then the second thing was, the second thing it taught me is that he had my back. And so that whatever mistakes I made, that they then became our mistakes. And that freed me up to be the most authentic leader that I have been able to be. And I think that has made all of the difference in our working relationship. This understanding that someone is interested in knowing you on a deeper level, and then secondly, that you are in this thing together. And I that is the foundation of the work that we do today. And even when conflict arises, I hold on to those two things. And that gets me through. So it's a journey.
That's wonderful and really powerful for those of us who are, especially if we're in we're in the third place of leadership. What is it? How can we? I mean, my whole team, I could be the father to everybody on my team in terms of age, and that's great. Well, Ray, you've just been outed as a legend, and I believe it too, because man, you got there are articles and interview. When you have a birthday, it shows up in the paper, and I believe that. So, from your point of view, talk about the relationship and the working relationship with Sherreta.
So first of all, I have been blessed to have some really wonderful people to nurture me and to pour into me. I mean, and it goes all the way back to my childhood. I can remember as a kid in Sunday school when my Sunday school class had to do the poem, do a program at the church service, and this wonderful woman who was the superintendent of the Sunday school, who said, "And you understand that you can't carry any paper up there to read, that you have to memorize this and you have to be able to deliver it without looking at paper." And so from the church, from schools, um, um, I had a high school principal. I didn't get off to a great start in ninth grade. And so about the third or fourth day from class, I got suspended for 3 days, and thought that I could probably act like I was going to school for 3 days. So I didn't think it was really important to tell my parents that kind of small stuff. And we sat down for dinner that evening, and this long black Cadillac turned in our driveway, and I recognized that it was the principal from the school coming in. And unfortunately, he had been my mother's principal also. And he started the conversation with, "I expected more from your child." Uh, and of course, that was not a good night at my house. But this man took me under his wing, and so I've had people to sow into me. And God knows I have made a lot of bad decisions and choices, but I've had people who've given me space to grow. And so I wanted to create an environment where there were really talented people around me, and they had the bandwidth to do that. Sherreta pointed out something that was really a happenstance. And it is that she participated in our leadership development initiative. She was a part of the second cohort, which she will always say is the best cohort. Uh, but but when I look at our team now, there are 4 or 5 members of our team who've all come out of the leadership development. And so, we have a shared language, we understand our work in a similar way. But I just think that it's really important, and I'll wrap up on this note. I just think that it's really important to be able to see a thing through another set of eyes, another perspective, another set of experiences, a different worldview in some ways. And that is what I value about Sherreta. Our relationship is not this wise sage speaking to the newbie. I mean, this is a reciprocal relationship, and I benefit from her knowledge as much as she does mine. She is a little more adaptive in dealing with it than I can be sometimes, but it's definitely a reciprocal relationship.
Man, that's that image then of reciprocity and caring deeply for your colleague as a person, and it's just, I mean, that's stuff we can carry with us. So I love I'm encouraged by your relationship, and Ray, it just strikes me that you're still in a learning mode, right? You've done a lot of learning in your life, but you're still open to learning, and from Sherreta and from others, and that's an awful lot about what it's like to flourish in this season of life. So I've got some questions that I'd like to ask, and this is now to any of you. But one of the things I'm curious about is, all of you are involved in helping older adults, the folk we call third people, getting engaged in work that really matters in this intergenerational work. So what do you find motivates those people, the older adults, to get involved?
I'll jump in real quickly. I think that people care more than we give them credit for. We oftentimes don't create the right platforms, and we don't allow people to see the value of sharing their experiences and their wisdom. one of the most impactful books for me is, of course, by Mark Friedman, How to Live Forever. And I was just absolutely captivated by the title of the book. I had a college professor who said to me once that every day I come in this room, I'm able to touch eternity. Mm. Because by helping you, I never know where that touch will end. And so I think that people want to sow into things that will live longer than them. And that's certainly what I see so very often.
Wonderful. Anybody else want to pick up that one before we move on?
I'd love to key off of something Ray talked about earlier, because I've been intrigued by how much in intergenerational work is parallel with older and younger generations. Sometimes I think one reason we've segregated the generations is an assumption that they need very different things. And I was really moved, Ray, by your story of your principal who came and let you know he had his eyes on you and that he had higher expectations. And in my experience, I feel like I've worked and lived in many spaces where we are not, as younger people, articulating that to our elders, and have allowed older adults to feel like their experience and their purpose is no longer needed or wanted. And, you know, like as an example, very concrete example is when I ran Experience Corps, there were a couple of neighborhoods I was in where there were a lot of grandparents who would drop the kids off in the after school program, and then they would sit and wait for their grandchild to pick them up afterwards. Nobody had reached out to those grandparents and said, you're already here. You have so much you could give. Would you like to get involved in the after school program? Would you like to help, you know, lead a quilting class? Would you want to play chess with these kids? Would you read a story to these kids? Would you play basketball out there? I don't think there was an assumption of seeing this community member as a huge asset, literally sitting in that space untouched. And so part of me feels like I want to be, and I think Sherreta wants to be, part of a generation that interacts with our elders and says, we not only see your value, we desperately need and want you in the mix. And I think we can make decisions, as Sherreta and I have to say, and I don't want to work a different way. Come be part of this. I will learn from you, but I think there's something you can learn from me as well, because it's the mutuality of the relationship that's so powerful.
Yeah,
you know, you folks, go ahead, Sherreta, please.
I was going to say, and I just wanted to add, because I think, Eunice, you lifted up something that we assume that what the generations need or want are two different things. And one of the things that I've seen just in talking to leadership pairs, both together and people who practice leadership separately, is that it doesn't matter if they are Gen Z all the way up to baby boomers. Two things keep coming up, right? Leadership and doing this kind of work can be lonely, right? That having someone who shares an understanding of where you are currently has just been important. But I think for the older individuals, it's about connecting with someone who maybe you don't have that in your peer groups, because peer groups are important, but there is something, and I think it's akin to kind of that legacy and pouring in that Raymond talked about. There is something about reducing isolation with someone that you feel gets where you have been and where you're going and those kinds of things. And so I think those two things, that loneliness and that legacy, continues to motivate older people, but it motivates the younger ones also, because even in 20s and 30s, people are concerned about what's to come and what they leave behind. And so I think loneliness and legacy and the reduction of that loneliness is definitely a motivator for these intergenerational intergenerational relationships.
Mark, if I could jump in real quick and just say a critical element of this is the frame that we bring, the narrative that we accept. So very often people, one of the things that inner city neighborhoods and older people and younger people can have in common is people come with a deficit-based perspective. I need to fix what's wrong with this community, or this older person has these challenges that I can help, or this young whippersnapper doesn't know this, so I need to teach them, rather than bringing an asset-based perspective to it and recognizing that there is something inherently good and beneficial that resides in this community and in this person that can be of benefit to me and the world around us.
That's wonderful. I'm curious about how you all see Christian faith as relevant to and perhaps enriching this work. And obviously, folk could do really great work, and you don't have to be a Christian. But for those of us who are, how does it inform what you're doing? And I'm just curious about that.
So I'll dive in here because like so many things, I actually think the church is primed for leadership on intergenerational work and intergenerational matters. First of all, the structure is there, right? The church is one of the only institutions where older people, adults, young adults, and children commune on a regular basis. Young people move out, professionals retire, but they still show up at the church. And so you have this structure that is intergenerational right there. And then the other thing that I think is unique about the church is that it is the one place where experience is both the only criteria you need and a criteria that doesn't matter. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So, the scripture talks about those believers who are still on milk and just getting started, and those who are on meat, right, and have matured. And the church is a place for both of them. And the expectation is that both of them are learning and growing and helping one another. And that is the model for intergenerational work, right? This expectation that no matter where you fall on this line of experience or even age, the expectation is that you are still learning, you are still growing, you're still developing, and you're doing it in community with other people in different stages. And so imagine what happens when that structure is then put to work, right? Imagine what happens when we stop hiding the elders or stop hiding the children, and each person has a role. And imagine what happens internally in the church, but then what happens to the community in which that church exists. And I don't even know if I'm answering your question right now, because this is something that I've thought so much about in terms of leadership in the Christian faith. I believe that the church is just ready to model that for the world. I'll stop there.
Well, not only does that answer my question, that's a really thoughtful and relevant answer. I was thinking I was going to ask a more specific church question, but you've already jumped right in, which is really, really good. The other, you want to weigh in on this one at all?
Yeah, I do. I want to first of all answer Derek's question in the chat. Yes, Sherreta does preach to me from time to time, and they're really good sermons. I saw something on social media that just really stuck with me, and it said the statement was, "You can master the image, but you can't fake the fruit." And I think that the most critical element of the church is, what is the fruit that you are producing? Is the world a better place because you exist there? I agree wholeheartedly with my partner that the church has that potential. But the question is, are we committed to living that out, to bearing that fruit, to making the world better? And the last thing that I will say that'll probably maybe get me kicked out of the preachers union, but I would share with the folks at Star Hill that as you go into the world, you don't have to lead with Jesus. That doesn't have to be the conversation starter. You don't have to draw that out as a litmus test for relationship. Now, if you are a Christian, then it's probably a good idea to bring him along with you. But he doesn't have to lead in your engagement and as you seek to impact the world. I just think that it creates a greater space for people who are like-minded and like spirit, like-hearted, to find ways to be together. And I think that that's a lot more important than some of the other things that we insist that people do and be.
And
Wonderful.
I would only add to, I was really trying to get in between you, Sherreta, and Ray, because I did not want to follow both of you. So I'll just add one thing, which is I feel like in a society where, as Sherreta, you mentioned, there's such deeply entrenched loneliness. And, I think we often associate aging with a certain amount of loneliness as your social network and connections may thin out. But right now, the research shows that young people are actually reporting the highest rates of loneliness. And I just think we can't solve some of the ramifications of generational siloing with siloed conversations generationally. And so it's one reason why I'm always so inspired when I see, Sherreta, your relationship with Raymond, when I see faith institutions which do have capacity to have these different populations actually intentionally bring them together. I think they are uniquely suited to do that. And I think the only path to bringing us together is literally by doing it together. This is not rocket science. And yet I think the problem solving is still happening in these siloed ways. A group of leaders who are trying to figure out how to solve this problem without young people at the table, or a group of young people who are feeling unanchored because they don't have a broader set of experience, but they're only talking amongst themselves. So I think there's a real opportunity here.
Man, that's so encouraging. I mentioned that my team in the Pree Center are all quite a bit younger folk. And, we talk about the third work, and sometimes I wonder if maybe I'm kind of boring them or something. And now you encouraged me to say, no way, their input and wisdom has a lot to offer. So I love that. So we've got some questions, and I really want to let you respond to these questions, some good questions here. First one. So this is really for Ray and Sherreta. How do you sustain your great work and metamorphosis financially? And this could be a potential donor. So do a good answer.
Part of Sherreta's position as the sustainability catalyst is to do just that, to help us to sustain. We are one of the things that we've been really intentional about. So many nonprofits are solely funded by philanthropy and wealthy donors. We have worked very hard to diversify our revenue stream. And so I think looking at our audit from last year, about 38% of our revenues were self-generated through fees for services and things that we provide. The goal is to move that closer to 50% of the revenues that we generate. But that other 50% is from foundations, wealthy individuals who see the value of the work that we do and write checks on a regular basis.
Wonderful. Man, that's great. Thank you for that. So I got another really good question here, and this really connects to the church a question we were talking about, and Sherreta, your input. This person asks, what would be some of the first steps for a church to take in this journey of intergenerational collaboration, especially given our history of generational segregation in churches and in life? So what would be some of the first steps a church might take, you folks?
Again, having thought a good deal about this, because I came to the church as an adult, as a young adult in my 20s. And so I've thought a lot about what this looks like to create these pathways for younger people in the church. And I think the very, very first thing, and I promise this is not just me trying to be cliche, but I think the very, very first thing is that we have to look to the scripture, because there are several examples of where age is something to be both respected and utilized in furthering the work of the kingdom. And that's youth and old age, right? And so we have Samuel, we have Jeremiah, we have Paul telling Timothy, don't let anybody despise you for being young, right? And so we have these examples of youth being utilized in the church, but we also have these examples of older age being used. And Mark, you do a great job on your blog of highlighting why that's important, right? And so I think the first thing is we have to ground ourselves in the scripture and understand that that age is not a disqualifier from this work, right? And so again, we have to stop, as Eunice said, siloing people and assuming that age is somehow whatever. But I also think churches need to be thinking about sustainability, right? Again, that's what I do. So thinking about sustainability, and ask yourself two very fundamental questions. In 10, 20, 30, 40 years, who will lead this work, and who currently is helping them to do that? And so this idea that, and I know we don't like to think about it, but this idea that, people won't be around forever. And so we have to be intentional about creating pathways for those who will come behind us. And so I think it has to start with this examination of us through a sustainability lens. Who's going to lead this work in the future, and what do we do to equip and develop them to do so? I'll say this and then I'll stop. We like to think of leadership, or we like to think of this as this destination that somehow people just become ready to lead, when it's really more of a journey and someone is guiding them along that way. And so I think the church has to just be more intentional about creating these pathways for young people to be guided, and in doing so, leverage the wisdom of the older, more mature people. And so I'll just offer those two things. Start with the scripture and then view things through a sustainability lens, and then create pathways that respond to both of those.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have a question that I love this question. It's very honest, and I think it probably reflects a lot of the experience of folk, certainly in the world, in our cities, in our churches, but even on this call. So this person asks, how do I talk myself into believing I have something to offer when my background doesn't have fancy leadership titles? I've been an informal leader in my career, but I don't come with all of the things that look so good and all that. So, somebody who cares but isn't sure that she has as much to offer. What would you say to her? I think that's a great question.
Ray, was that you wanted to say something, or you?
No, I was actually sure I wanted to give you an opportunity to dive in there, Eunice.
One, I would say in my experience, and I have worked with a lot of older adults and young people, bringing them together. In the aftermath of the activity that happened or the relationship forming over many years, it's very rare that the answer has been something so tactical or tangible as a skill set that that person had. You heard Sherreta talk about, now obviously Ray has had an incredible career and there was intimidation piece. But in the end of the day, I don't think I heard Sherreta say, and Ray taught me how to build a great strategic plan or how to orchestrate, organizational structures. What she said is Ray gave her permission to be who she is. And so I think we have to stop elevating the specific tasks. What people really are hungering for is relationship, and anybody has that qualification. I appreciate, Sherreta, where you started and said in some ways, places, faith communities are places where experience is valued and experience is not necessary. This tension between the two, I think, is brilliant. I've never heard it said that way. And so I would lean into the relationship. I think even Ray, the story you told about your principal, I didn't hear the part where he then met with you on a daily basis. Maybe that happened, but I suspect even if he did, it wasn't concrete skills so much as the fact that he showed you that he was going to be consistent in your life. We can all offer that.
I would just say, yes, Eunice, he did talk to me about life and how you, my phrase here, how you do life in a way that matters and makes a difference. My advice, Mark, to the person in that question is, one, understand what you do well, keep working to do it exceptionally well, and look around you and find a place where somebody could benefit from that thing being done well. And you will be appreciated, resume notwithstanding.
Thank you. Great answer. Man, we have so many other questions, but I'm wanting, as we're getting near the end of this time, I'm wanting each of you to have a chance to. Somebody in the chat was talking about Sherreta preaching. Each of you the chance to preach a little, but really the question I'd have for each one of you, and you can go in whatever order you want, it's like, okay, so we've got folk here who are really interested in this. And again, let me say to you folk, we'll put up some links if you're interested in the work. I mean, there's tremendous stuff over at Encore. You can get in and really look at what Metamorphosis is doing. And Raymond also has a website, which we have linked to and we'll link to, and we'll also be sending that stuff out. So there are resources that are available. And I know we're just getting into this and we weren't able to address all the questions. But my final question then really is, so what would you like people to come away from this webinar with today that they could really hang on to as they go out into their day and the week and, the rest of their lives? What do you want people to come away with?
I can start because I definitely don't want to end this. Sherreta or Ray should end this section. So I want to go back to the excellent question about how what can we do in a concrete way, either as a faith institution or as an individual. I think reducing the field sometimes for those of us to something that feels manageable is important. So I would say the simplest way we talk about it at Encore is to get proximate. If you open your eyes to the populations that are around you, you might think that you're in only with young people or only with older people. That's likely not true in your neighborhood, in your church, in your faith community, in your office. And then make a small test, do something very manageable, something that feels manageable for you to just intersect your life, a moment with that other person. And to get really concrete, that could be that you're in your church setting, in a life group or a community group of young people. We tend to cluster people in life stage. Could you pair up with a life group or a small group that is older people and just say, could we just do one event together? Could we do one Zoom dinner together and just share life stories? Low bar, nothing too intimidating, and just see where that leads you. If you lead a service project through your organization, often those are bifurcated. A service project for young people, one for adults. What about one where you specifically call out, this one is intergenerational. We want you to bring your grandparents. We want you to bring your kids, and you design it so that it's actually cognizant of an experience that's good for all people. I think we can start small, and people will start to have these wonderful experiences that cause them to lean in more and then get more creative. So that would be my starting point. Just do one test and then go from there.
Great. Now that is something folks can take with them. Sherreta, Ray, how about you folks?
I would say that I think the first thing I'll say is to both younger and older people, is to remember that you belong and your life has purpose and meaning, and that does not start or stop with a calendar or a designated birthday or something of that nature. That throughout your entire living, breathing experience, there you have work to do, and accepting that, I think is important. And then I would say, be intentional about um, intersecting with other people, much like Eunice said, in other walks of life and generations, that enhance your purpose. And so, look for ways to create pathways, to create connections. Look for ways to be a part of those, because they don't just happen and they do take work. But ultimately they'll be so worth it, because you'll be enhancing your God-given purpose. And so be intentional.
Awesome. Raymond, you get the last word in this.
There are enough people on this watching and sharing in this webinar right now to turn the United States of America upside down. If we all were focused on accomplishing the same thing, if we created the bandwidth for us to go about it in our respective ways, if we communicated with one another and understood how we could leverage our actions and ways in which we could support one another, that there are enough people here that could just become a major disruptive force for good, should we choose to do so. So it doesn't require the army to make a difference. It requires people who are committed and people who are willing to work together. I send out a tweet most mornings that asks the question, what will you do today that will matter 20 years from now?
Hmm.
And I spend the rest of the day trying to answer that question for myself. I would encourage others to do the same thing.
Wow. That's also probably the best tweet of the day. I just got to say, that's a wonderful question to ask. And well, we're at the end of our time. I feel like we could have kept going and going, but we need to be faithful in what we've said to you folks. Eunice and Ray and Sherreta, first of all, just thank you so much for being with us today, for for your life and your work, and for sharing all of that with such a generosity and wisdom. And again, we have in the chat, and we'll be sending out ways that people can continue to learn more and connect with you. And so this doesn't have to come to an end. And I do want to thank also all of you who've joined us in this webinar. And we are glad to be able to serve you. I will say, by the way, when we send out the email that just has the links and all that, we're also going to have some info on some discounts on some things that we sell that are to help folk in third. And so because you were here, you get a special discount if you're interested. That's coming up. We do webinars like this for third about once a month or so. In fact, in next month, I'm going to be interviewing an amazing leader from Minneapolis who is using now his gifts in the third of his life, especially to encourage younger leaders and also to be working for racial justice in a part of our country that has been really torn apart. And it's going to be a really interesting and inspiring conversation. So you'll hear more about that coming up in the middle of April. So again, Eunice, Ray, Sherreta, thanks to all of you, and to all of you who have been here. Blessings to all, and y'all have a great day.